the University of Arizona Bio5 Institute, we bring together hundreds of multifaceted experts that include world-class bioscientists, engineers, physicians, and computational researchers. This team science approach is designed to ignite creative solutions to the many complex biological challenges facing our families and communities, and has resulted in disease prevention strategies, promising new therapies, innovative diagnostics and devices, and improved food sustainability.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Science Talks, a conversation hosted by the University of Arizona's Bio5 Institute. My name is Brittany Ulorn.
And I'm Paulina Garza.
Sustainable agriculture is quickly becoming the wave of the future as we find ways to feed a world approaching 10 billion by 2050. Our researchers are developing novel solutions that enable the production of more food with less use of our precious resources. So using the framework of sustainable agriculture, Dr. Joel Coelho is looking up for answers in the form of vertical farming. We are excited to have Dr. Cuello on the podcast today. He is a professor of agriculture-biosystems engineering, applied biosciences, and arid lands resource sciences, as well as a Bio5 member. So we're excited to hear more about his solutions to feed a hungry, growing planet. Dr. Cuello, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Paulina.
Of course. So let's put things into context for our listeners. Why might the way that agriculture is currently or historically been done, why does it fail to meet the needs of our growing planet today and in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question, but I'd like to start with what you just said, and that's because our planet keeps on growing in terms of population. So I think as you alluded or referred to earlier, our current population stands at about 7.6 billion, thereabout. And in another 28 years, it's going to go up to about 9.7 billion. So that's like adding another Europe and another Africa to our current planet in terms of population. So that's a lot of people to feed. And that is why the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization has projected that to be able to meet the food demand by 2050, we need to increase our food production by 70%. And in terms of crop production, we have to double it. And so that's a tall order, especially, and this is part of the answer to your question, is because our current way of producing food is very high resource intensive. There's a lot of input that is required. And currently, our food production is already responsible for 70% of all freshwater withdrawals. We're already using about half of all habitable land on the planet. And the food supply chain and food production accounts for already about 30% of all energy expenditures. So just imagine if we're going to increase our food production by another 70%, where are we going to get all of our production input that is required? So that is a tall challenge. And the only way to be able to address that is to innovate and come up with new and innovative solutions that we hope will also be sustainable and therefore can minimize the inputs that are needed. So basically, it's producing more out of little or out of less.
That is quite the challenge. And I can imagine, just with what you're saying with how current practices use a lot of water and land. Well, with the growing population, they're going to need the water and the land as well. So it's definitely important to find ways to produce more food with less. So I like that. I like that point you made.
So,
yes.
Sorry. So your solution to the problem is vertical farming. Can you describe what that looks like and what benefits it has?
Yes, I would say primarily is vertical farming, but there is another solution on the horizon that I would like to add to this as well. But let's start with vertical farming. So vertical farming is basically the antithesis of open agriculture or open farming. With vertical farming, basically you're doing agriculture or crop production in a closed space or closed environment. And the main advantage of that is that you control the environment inside. And as such, you become independent of the season and the weather and the climate. So basically, you can do this 24/7, 365 days a year, and independent of the geography, and again, independent of the changing climate as well. So which is a powerful idea.
Are there like certain crops that are better suited for vertical farming, or do they all like work the same?
Right. So I need to add, to answer your question, that the technology, the innovation of vertical farming really originated from the space program, from NASA, as well as, I must say, from the former USSR space program as well. And that is in preparation for life support systems for astronauts in the future who would be going for a long duration crewed mission to the moon or Mars. They would need to be able to produce their own food on site. And that is how this form of agriculture or crop production was originally developed. And I did my postdoctoral fellowship at NASA Kennedy, so I had the privilege of being exposed to it early on. And then over the decades, it's been commercialized initially in Japan, and today it's being commercialized worldwide. And it now is benefiting from the convergence of all of these innovations that have been developed in the last 20 and 30 years, with light emitting diodes, with data analytics, with artificial intelligence, with automation, with robotics. All of these innovations and technologies are now converging into vertical farming to really not only make it possible, but make it feasible. But the answer to your question is that back when I was at a postdoc at NASA Kennedy Space Center, this is about 27 years ago, at that time, NASA had already grown all types of crops in a vertical farming prototype, if you will, salad type crops and cereals, wheat, barley, potatoes, tomatoes, everything. So commercially, there's nothing that prevents any vertical farming company from growing any of these crops, but it's a matter of the economics. Right now, it's the high value crops that are favored economically, but not the commodity crops, because commodity crops are produced in large quantities and they're generally low cost in the global market. So it's hard to compete with commodity crops. So right now, vertical farms are focused on the high value crops.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the postdoc research, can you talk more about that, what you did at NASA?
It was exciting. Well, because we were designing innovations and technologies for a future human habitat or colony, if you will, in an extraterrestrial environment. Plus, I was doing this at NASA Kennedy Space Center, where I was able to witness the takeoff of the space shuttle and the landings. All of that is quite exciting as well. However, what I really appreciated about my exposure to NASA and working on life support systems is treasuring and valuing and really recognizing the critical importance of sustainability. Because when you work for designing food systems for extraterrestrial applications, where you don't have running water on the moon or Mars, and the radiation is deadly because of ionizing radiation, and the temperature is swinging wildly between night and day, you really have to be able not only to control your environment, but be able to recycle as much as possible all of the input resources that are needed. And so that sort of extreme scenario really, really helped me appreciate the importance of sustainability in terms of applying that here on Earth, in terms of food production on Earth. So that was my real take home from my experience at Kennedy. But I would like to add at this point that, again, we have to innovate so that we can meet the rising food demand by the middle of the century. And another innovation that really is now emerging in the marketplace is what is known as cellular agriculture. And part of this is plant-based protein. So as you know, we all like, and I suppose most of us, we like meat. However, production of meat is quite problematic because number one, it produces a lot of greenhouse gases, which contribute to the changing climate. In fact, 25% of all greenhouse gas emissions can be traced to food production and the supply chain. And 75% of that emissions is accounted for by animal production. And not only that, I mentioned earlier that we're already using about half of our habitable land on the planet for food production. Well, 75% of that is devoted to animal agriculture. it does not refer only to the land that's occupied by the animals. It's relatively small, but the rest is for growing the crops that are needed as feed for the animals. So it's a really a resource intensive enterprise to be able to grow meat as we know it. And so with cellular agriculture, one is cell-based meat. So you don't grow the whole animals. You take some cells from say cattle, and then you culture it in the lab, and then you mass produce it in bioreactors, and then you harvest the cells and you constitute them into meat products, like a burger, for instance. So with this, you save on land by as much as 98%, and you save on greenhouse gas emissions by about 95%, and you save tremendous amounts of water in the process as well. So that's one. The other one is plant-based meat, which is not real meat. I mean, it's vegan, but it has the same, with food technology now and with the innovations and advances, they can make it taste like regular meat with the same texture, with the same flavor, and so on and so forth, which is healthier, both for humans as well as for the planet as well.
Oh, that is fascinating. I mean, I've definitely been aware and I've tried myself plant-based meats, and you're right, they do taste like the Impossible Burger, the Beyond Burger. Like, they taste just like a regular burger. But I'm kind of curious. I have not heard of this, and I can't remember what how you termed it, but growing up the part of the organism, the cells, and growing up the building blocks of the meat in a bioreactor. I had not heard of that before, so that was really interesting.
Right. Well, that is actually what makes it possible. So that's the enabling technology behind the cell-based meat as well as plant-based proteins. Well, with plant-based protein or meat, you can use ingredients that are grown in open fields, but you also have the option of growing the ingredients in bioreactors as cells. One of which is there's a company, for instance, in Germany that's using mushroom or mycelia as the building block for a plant-based protein. So they're growing the mycelia in bioreactors. There's another company in Singapore that has pioneered using microalgae as the major ingredient for plant-based meat. I think it's called Sophie's Bionutrients, and the one in Germany for mushroom is called Mush Labs. So this is exciting because one of the research area that I have is on bioreactors for growing algae. And so I've been contacted by a company that is based in Phoenix that is really interested in plant-based meat. And so we are going to work on that using microalgae as the main ingredient for producing plant-based meat. So I'm really excited about that. It's good for humans and it's good for the planet as well.
Right. Yeah. Well, you don't have to convince me. I am definitely a fan of eating more plant-based products. But I'm just thinking, both from a consumer perspective, a science perspective, a marketing perspective, I know for myself, like adopting these plant-based things is exciting and not a challenge. But then my parents hear about the things I'm eating and, they kind of turn their noses up and they want to stick to their regular animal-based products. So how do you go about how do we approach educating the public, and especially those populations that maybe really just emotionally or even culturally or just preferentially, biased towards meat and don't want to adopt more of these sustainable and healthier options? How do you approach that?
All right. So for a start, to me, it's not one or the other. It's both. Meat will not go away. It will always be there. But on the other hand, given that our global population keep on going, we need to supplement it with something else. With meat, something that tastes like meat, has the texture of meat, but it is more sustainable to produce. And that's where cell-based meat and plant-based meat come in. So it's not meant to replace real meat, so to speak, but it's there to complement it and to supplement it so that we can all live together in a more sustainable planet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I know, you're also involved in a startup called Algae Cell. Is that correct?
Yes.
So can
Yeah.
you tell us a bit more about this company and the technology?
Right. So as I mentioned, yeah, I work with vertical farming, but I also work with microalgae production in bioreactors. And that's because my PhD is on bioreactor design. So now I had the opportunity, or I have the opportunity of working together with my grad students in my laboratory group to design original forms or designs of bioreactors. And we've been quite successful on that. We've already patented 3 original bioreactors. 2 are pending in terms of their patent, and there's 1 more that's in development. But anyway, the 5 bioreactors have been licensed exclusively to this company called Algae Cell. And now Algae Cell has been contacted by companies in Japan, in Australia, United Arab Emirates, and the United Kingdom to work together with Algae Cell to produce algae for various applications. One of which is for spirulina, which is a protein source that can be used as well for plant-based protein. And so that's an exciting space. But I need to add, this is going to be related to Algae Cell as a company as well, but not yet at the moment because this is more like academic. I'm partnering with a professor in Lunar and Planetary Laboratory. He's an astrophysicist. His name is Daniel Apayi. And another professor in ecology and evolutionary biology. His name is Regis Ferrier, or maybe that's Ferrier, he's French. And together with a PhD student in my group, Jack Welchert, as well as a postdoc, Martin Schwecker, working with Daniel Apayi. And we actually submitted an application to the X Prize, which is organized by the Musk Foundation. And that is for essentially sequestering CO2 from the air to be able to rebalance the carbon cycle on the planet to help mitigate the changing climate. So that is really exciting for us. And the solution that we're proposing is we're going to use the air accordion photobioreactors, and we're going to be growing an alga, which is coccolithophores, which is green. It's photosynthesizing, it's capturing CO2, and then it fixes that CO2 and transforms that into calcium carbonate, which is a plate, it's a solid material. And so you can then isolate the calcium carbonate and convert that, for instance, into a building material. So we really believe that this approach and strategy for capturing CO2 from the air is something that is viable. And so we look forward to perfecting that and really establishing its economic feasibility going forward.
Yep. So where does like the passion and like the want to do this come from?
Yeah, so it's multi-layered, I would say. One, of course, is, as I mentioned, I've really learned to really value sustainability. The only way that we can go on as a civilization, as a species, as a planet is really by taking sustainability very seriously as part of our value for our human existence and human progress. Without that, the future is bleak. But with that, I think there is a way. That's one. The other one is, well, I'm a professor, and it's a real privilege to be, imparting knowledge to young people. But it's not just a matter of imparting knowledge, but it's really equipping them and training them to become value creators. And that's just another term for being innovators, because that's what we need today in our planet is we're faced with so many challenges, grand challenges, lots of disruptions. And the only way that we can address them and at the same time advance the global economy is through value creation or innovation. And to me, that's really satisfying and very rewarding to be able to work with young people and train them in being able to have the ability to create value, which is of great help and value to society and to the human race.
Yeah, that's really cool because I'm vegetarian. I became vegetarian. Well, the biggest part of it was for sustainability. And so that's like really cool to hear.
Well, that's great.
We like to think of our researchers here as superheroes. So if you were a superhero, what would your power be?
Yeah. I like that question. So Well, in popular culture, there's superheroes, and I think that's a way for us to project the intensification of regular folks, because each one of us, we have our own talent, we have our own way of contributing to society. And so superheroes are just the magnification of that, the intensification of that. So my view is that all of us are superheroes. We're all meaningful contributors to society and helping one another. So if I were a superhero, I would like to keep the same superpowers that I have now, which is, the ability to create value and to be able to work with young people and impart to them, that ability to also create value. I think in a sustainable way, in a resilient way, in an equitable way. And I think that's how the human civilization can progress.
Very impactful. And I mean, that just, goes to the heart of where your passion stems from for what you do, both research-wise and, educating and empowering the next generation. So I think those are, it's very fitting to choose that as your superpower. Well, thank you again, Dr. Cuello, for joining Paulina and I today. I know we enjoyed your conversation, and I know our listeners did too.
It's my pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for another episode of Science Talks. For more information about the Bio5 Institute, please visit our website at bio5.org. And from all of us here at Bio5, we will see you in the next episode.
Thanks to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of Science Talks. Continue the conversation with us next time as we learn more about the amazing science happening at the University of Arizona's Bio5 Institute.